So in typical podcast fashion, I'll say something like, well, why don't we start? Wyatt, this was your idea. Why don't you start us off? You've got the agenda. What's happening? Why are we here, man?
Folks, welcome to the Mainland Megawatts Mayhem Cycling Podcast. I'm Wyatt.
Name TBD.
My
Name
co-host
TBD.
here is Jordan Behan. We're here to introduce you to all the thrills and chills and spills that happen in and around Vancouver in the cycling scene. Something silly like that, you know?
Yeah. Sure. Point of correction, though. My last name has a silent H. It's Behan.
Oh.
So you just before I hit record, you said this is like the first date episode where everybody's getting to know one another. I've given my kids,
I've known you for this long now.
Everybody makes that mistake, though. Everybody makes that mistake. There's no reason in the world why you'd think that that's a silent H. It makes no sense at all. But I've given my kids license to correct anybody in their life that says it wrong. So Behan.
It's good to know, because I've been meaning to tell you in the movie Tombstone, one of Wyatt Earp's arch nemesis,
Sheriff Behan.
Yeah,
and they say Behan in that movie, and that's bullshit. He's also a yellow-bellied varmint. He's worthless, Virgil had to step in. I love that movie, incidentally, and I've been telling my sister, if you're watching, because her son's name is Wyatt, that she and her husband need to sit down and watch Tombstone because that movie's awesome.
One of the best Western movies ever made.
It is one of the best, and I believe Val Kilmer's best performance.
Yeah,
awesome.
Couldn't agree
more. Now that we're clear on that, well, the fact that you agree is evidence of why we're here. I think we vibe like that, Wyatt. What's first up on your agenda for our new cycling podcast?
Well, like I say, we're just going to introduce who we are here today, kind of explain what got us into cycling, what we do when we are cycling, and some other tidbits about our own cycling careers and how that led us to where we are right now.
Why don't you go first, man? What led you to cycling?
A YouTube video that showed the Pit River Hot Springs, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. So you weren't lying when you said it was the Pit River Hot Springs that made you want to get a bike.
Yeah, it was. So it's funny that this has all come full circle now.
Because of what we did last weekend, exactly. Which maybe we should tell people.
We went to Pit River Hot Springs
on our bikes.
And I highly recommend it to everybody. Our adventure in particular probably wasn't for the faint of heart, considering the weather.
Right.
But I don't think those cliffs get any easier to crawl down on a nice day.
No, the boat ride might get a little easier in better weather. Mm. It was chilly and wet, which made the coffee taste better, and it made the hot springs feel better, But like you say, not for the faint of heart, certainly. If you don't like getting wet, if you're made of sugar, stay home. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah,
okay, so you saw a YouTube video and then you had to get a bike?
Yeah, so I watched a video. The guy canoes across Pit Lake with a bike in his canoe, hops on the forestry road on the other side, rides to the hot springs, videotapes it all. I'm like, this is awesome. This is what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
So I went on Craigslist and looked for a bike, found that old Rocky Mountain bike that I ended up selling to you.
Yeah.
And couldn't convince. So my old boss was the only guy I knew that had a boat, and he had the perfect boat for it too. And I could not convince him to drive me across Pit Lake.
Huh.
So next best thing for me to do was just enter a triathlon. So
learn how to swim instead.
Yeah, much to your chagrin,
dude. Yeah, I was just gonna say I could blow that argument to bits. The next best thing to do was to enter a triathlon.
Well, I didn't know any better.
I'll say you didn't know any better.
Yeah. So I entered the triathlon. Ended up going to a few of them. Last winter when we were going to start training again, we saw these cyclocross races on the internet, and we thought, shit, these sound fun. We should try this. And then CX led us to Bespoke. We joined Bespoke together, and then our participation with Bespoke took us to Pit River. So everything kind of went full circle.
Yeah. Well, I think your background is pretty fascinating too, because before you were a bike racer, dot dot dot, you're from the Calgary area, and somewhat like I don't know. I'm from the West Coast, and when I think of people in Calgary, I think of 10-gallon hats and cowboy boots and Stampede and whatnot.
It's
And you actually have that pedigree. Tell us about
Yeah.
that.
Like both sides of my family kind of been cowboys in Canada since like cowboys was a thing in Canada. Like they showed up, they got a boat across the Atlantic, showed up, and just started chasing cows around.
Homesteading, yeah.
Yeah, riding bucking horses, shit like that.
Riding
My
bucking
uncle's
horses.
also in
That's
the
the
Hall-
part that I want to hear about, man. You're a rodeo cowboy.
Yeah, like my uncle's in the Hall of Fame, so
Okay.
it was
Drop your uncle's name, because I got cousins that ride barrels and
Bob Hartel is his name. He got inducted here, I think, like 5 or 6 years ago. Actually, might even be longer than that
wild.
now. So yeah,
Huh.
we just kind of grew up riding horses and rodeoing and doing silly stuff like that.
Cyclocross is the natural progression then,
Yeah,
in a way.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's rodeo on two wheels.
Yeah. Yeah. I nearly got bucked off today. We were up mountain biking on Mount From, and what I would call nearly went OTB. Just jammed the front wheel, and it felt like a horse trying to kick me off. But I held on for longer than 8 seconds too.
Sucker
It
down,
was
cowboy.
sketchy. Well, right on, man. And now you are, I mean, I would call you a bike racer because you race bikes, but you probably also identify as a triathlete.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. The pronouns are they. Don't know me, son.
Yeah, triathlon. I mean, we're just going to keep coming back to that. Every episode is going to have a certain amount of me just being grumpy about triathlon. And why would you be mediocre at three sports when you can really suck at one?
Yeah.
You know, like,
I mean, whatever brings more people into cycling, right? I would have never thought biking was a cool thing to do until I started doing triathlon. Like, honestly, I haven't rode a bike like regular since I was probably 13 years old.
hmm. Yeah.
And no matter what anybody tells you, riding a bike is not like riding a bike at all.
Sometimes it is actually, but it felt like that today. I was on my mountain bike for the first time in a while, and it came back pretty fast. The old adage was somewhat true. I think that's like a balance thing, right? The inner ear stuff. But there's a hell of a lot more to operating a bicycle than just, turning the pedals over and keeping it upright, obviously, especially when you're racing. Is it my turn? Do I talk about my history?
Absolutely. Let's hear it.
I first started riding bikes, I guess, like as a kid, 5, 6 years old, like anybody. I lived on a hill, and I think maybe that was formative. I remember my first mountain bike around 10 or 11 years old, funky triangle shaped handlebar, and it was way too big for me. And those kinds of things, like pedaling a big old heavy steel mountain bike up a hill before you could even go anywhere, was probably like, it set a certain tone, I guess. And then all my life I was chasing the bigger kids in trails and stuff in Powell River. And it turns out that, that has a way of making you reasonably decent at operating one of those things. And in my early 20s, I raced mountain bikes a little bit, cross country mostly, because that was, there was only really cross country and downhill in those days. So, ripping around on a hardtail. Really, like these days, you would say we were massively underbiked for what we were doing. And I think, again, that's kind of, you develop certain skills because you have to, with whatever's between your legs and the bike. And then actually it took quite a long hiatus from racing and from riding bikes seriously around the time, I guess, that I got married. And it wasn't until my divorce that I realized that my real passion was for bikes, and I started buying bikes again, and just I haven't stopped. Like you say, I bought one from you not too long ago for the kid, and obviously, I guess it was around. It's weird to think about, but I guess it was over 9 years ago now, 10 years ago maybe, really started getting back into it again, started racing again 7 years ago. Maybe it's 8. And have gotten more and more serious every year. This last year, I got so serious that I sort of structured my life around training and diet. And well, I guess that's the extent of it, right? It's like, how do I both train in the gym and on the bike and watch everything I eat? And what would it be like if I did everything right and removed all the excuses? And it turns out that worked pretty good too.
I think that
I'm
like,
also a
that's for
coach
both
now.
of us though. Like I think um, you say like structured your whole life around training and stuff, and like really that's all I do anymore anyway.
Yeah. I said it when I actually won a contest with this story, but I entered a photo and story contest, and I talked about how cycling, it wasn't like I was saying cycling saved my life or anything like that, but at a time when I needed it, it became my fitness, my therapy, my social life, like all wrapped into one. And it still is. Like there was a moment today when we had our bikes put away in the cars. We had just done a little over 2 hours of absolutely shredding our squishy bikes. And the three of us were just chatting and we didn't want to leave. You could tell everybody had like lives to go back to and stuff to do, but we just wanted to keep talking about the ride we had just done and hang out. And it occurred to me in the moment that that's what we were doing, right? Like I flipped my tailgate down and I sat down and I was like, no, let's settle in. Let's hang out for a while. Cause it looks like the fellas they're not in a hurry to get back to the kids right away. And we just, shot the shit for a bit and it was a good time. It is like all of my closest friends, shouldn't say all, but most of my closest friends are fellow bike racers and the people who will show up to something as crazy as cramming 5 people and 5 bikes into a boat to go up the lake and then up the river to a hot springs we've never been to. Those are the moments. That's what I'm in it for, man. Like that's the fun stuff.
Well, I guess so. With that, like, what do you participate most in with your cycling now? Like, what do you do most with cycling besides dodge your therapist?
I race just about every opportunity that I get, which is funny because if you asked me if I like bike racing, I would say no, I hate it. But for some reason, I do it. It's a joke. It's obviously I don't hate it because I do it often, but bike racing gives me that that feeling of anxiety and almost like fear and that challenge. But I guess I'm addicted to less the feeling right before the whistle and more, I think, the feeling immediately after crossing the line, regardless of what happened. So I race on the road, I race on Zwift, I race cyclocross, and the nature of that, it sort of feels like it's an all-year endeavor. Crit season is spring and summer. Road racing, of course, in spring, which transitions almost week on week into Zwift season. We started Zwift in September, and now we are right in the thick of our cyclocross season, which is only 6-7 weeks long or so. But through winter, we'll still be racing Zwift, and it'll be time to start training for a spring series on the road again. Like, February rolls around and we're rocking the 2-3 hour races again. I also like a long distance gravel race too. So, about the only thing that I don't do, ironically, is where I started, which is mountain bike cross country racing. I'd probably like to get back into that. I've done 1 or 2 Thursday night, the Glen Ridge races they have out here, but that's the one discipline that gets the least amount of attention, I guess. The joke today was how seldom I'm on my mountain bike when it was really my first love.
Let's go back to what you said about the where you hate racing, like the anxiety and stuff before the bell. Because I think that's just about every male-dominated sports podcast these days is saying the same thing. Is like you have to put yourself in those positions to kind of escape this anomic modern existence, right? Like you have to put yourself in those uncomfortable situations and like steer yourself into uncertainty and use that to like build yourself up.
I guess that's it. That's putting bigger words to it than I ever thought. Like it's funny how you look forward to something like that until it's right on top of you, and then for me, I'm a pretty anxious person, and in the moments before a race, I am. You could say I'm in the zone, but that makes it sound super positive and like I am like heads down committed. I have clarity when the opposite is true. I'm a bumbling mess inside. It's like, do I need to go pee one last time? Did I warm up enough? Like, oh shit, look at the calves on that guy. Like those kinds of things. You just absolutely like it's a mental battle to feel good enough about what you're doing. And then, kind of like really looking forward to the point when it's over. And only now that I am in the shape that I am, do I have moments within a race where I'll stop and think, hey, actually, I don't mind this too much. But usually, and for the longest time, it wasn't until after the race was over and then a day had passed where I actually could say that I enjoyed it. I think something has shifted in me now where I'm getting more out of my body. I'm getting closer to the results that I think I'm capable of. And so I'm letting myself off the hook a little bit and enjoying it. Whereas previously I made the mistake, I think, of just getting down on myself if things didn't go perfectly. And, you're just less fun to be around when you're like that. And so I've tried to like work on that skill of like, whatever happens, happens. I came out here to hang out, to have a good time, to see the people, to experience the community. And that's why I'm so pro cyclocross. It is the hardest thing to explain to somebody. Like, why do we ride in circles in a park with forced dismounts and this weird equipment and all of this? Like, there's so much of it that makes no sense whatsoever. Like a staircase in the middle of a bike race. It just doesn't add up. Like, why? And the answer is because it's so damn fun. Like, it's ridiculous to the point of being like a circus act that is fun. And don't make the mistake of thinking that just because it's fun, it's not challenging, because it is hard ass work. But like anyone who rides a bike, I think should try cyclocross because of how enjoyable it is. The challenge against the backdrop of that community aspect and the enthusiasm and almost like the traveling circus component of, the support from people, and it's a riot.
It is like the cycling, the rodeo event of cycling, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm not underselling it either. Yeah.
Everybody's drinking, giving each other shit.
Yeah. I could hyperbolize for the whole episode and still not oversell it. Like it's a hoot. And it almost, this is the sickness, I guess, that we all have, where some of us actually joke about the fact that like it's almost a shame that it didn't rain, because rain and terrible weather and mud and all of that would have made it better,
Well, it's like an equalizer that way, right?
Something like that. Yeah, it certainly makes for a different type of race. A different winner might emerge. Yeah.
Well, the rain falls on the just and the unjust alike, doesn't it?
True story. Wow, man, you're poignant.
Yeah.
There's
Good at remembering
poetic
stuff that other smart people come up with.
That's a skill. There was one other idea that I had for the podcast too that we can experiment with, is to have a question in any given episode that we want an objective answer to, and then we actually fire up ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT to answer the question for us. So there's a little bit of like an AI component. I like this. Who's the greatest Grand Tour winner of all time? Or that's just what
now because
came off the top of my head. Well, it's Marco Pantani, but I mean, that's a joke too.
That's what I was thinking.
Well, you could say like, well, I mean, it's interesting because, you know, the bots are trained on the data that they have previous to 2021 or whatever. Would ChatGPT spit back Lance Armstrong's name, or would it know better? And what criteria? Like, that's probably not even a good example of a question to ask it either. But I just thought it would be interesting to like, because I think I don't just think about recording a podcast. I think about promoting a podcast. And if you could tease, like, you have to wait until minute 17 of the podcast to find out what ChatGPT had to say about who's the greatest, you know, then you get people listening. Maybe they scrub to the 17-minute mark, but you know what I'm saying.
Well, here's an objective question for this one. What do you
Sure.
think is the most popular route in Vancouver for cyclists?
Great. We're on to our next agenda item. What do I think is the most popular route?
Let's go with what's your favorite and what do you think the most popular one is for everybody?
Okay, so in your agenda, I thought of this as being sort of like two separate questions. There is
It is.
cycling route, and then there is Strava segment, and they're two different things, I think.
Oh yeah, we got a lot to cover here.
Yeah. Okay, so route, I'm gonna go with a fairly predictable answer, and I think probably the one that benefits the cycling community the most. I'm going to say Stanley Park. I'm going to say a Stanley Park loop is the quintessential Vancouver cycling route for a lot of reasons. I'm a big fan. It's very close to my home. I was, for a period this year, I was the local legend of the Stanley Park loop.
Like the proper sploop or well, obviously not the seawall loop.
Well, it's interesting because I was only ever doing it from second beach to second beach because I exit and enter at where your triathlon was there. But it turns out that the loop, the Stanley Park loop segment, starts and ends at the roundabout, which is like 2 or 3 Ks down the road, and so I don't
think anybody enters that way, and I don't know if maybe that was like the old way to enter, like before they did the Pacific Street thing.
I don't know exactly why, but it is the segment. And so it's the segment that, well, it wasn't until I met this guy, Oliver Dowd, who I ended up being in a 2-way battle for the local legend status. And he said, oh, no, the segment is roundabout to roundabout. And I remember having done a really hot lap with my friend Trevor and Bastian, and it was the same thing for him. He was like, no, we time ourselves roundabout to roundabout, and that's the loop. So we gotta, like, that's the PR that we're gonna set for ourselves. So at this point now, I subscribe to the belief that that segment. Now we're not talking about segments yet. We're just talking about the route. But as it turns out, the segment goes from roundabout to roundabout. So if you're timing yourself, or if you're totaling up your quote unquote laps, for me that means like having to go all the way to the roundabout, turn back around, get out onto Georgia, and hook the right through the West End and back down to Beach Drive to go across Pacific and home across the bridge again. So I tag on those extra couple of Ks so that I complete my loops. But I was practically the local legend before I was on to that. So every time I went out, I was wasting 3/4 of a lap, right?
I gotta check something on Strava here. Do you know? So there is a 12 sploop segment. Speaking of segments,
I've never done that many.
So we did this. You know Christine? She's a member of the Spoke. I don't know if she wants to be name dropped on podcast, but we should probably throw it out there. She's like the route making queen.
I think we could safely use her first name. She is a legend. She trains harder than anybody.
Yeah. And is like on top of route making and adventure planning, and was the perfect person to meet to get into like endurance sports for me anyway. That was like my first kind of triathlon friend out here, which is like started racing triathlons. I found out Valza was a thing because I'd never swam open water before. So I thought, I'll go to Valza, and she was on the Valza board at that point. So we became friends. We lived close together, started riding bikes together, and now it's like every other weekend she's got some ridiculous adventure for us to go on that
Hmm.
she like come up with. And so long story short, the one of them was this 12 spook thing. Like show
Hmm.
up at Stanley Park at 5 o'clock in the morning because you got to do this before traffic sets in, and by 9 o'clock you've done a fondo that was like strictly sploops.
Huh. That's VAUSA, by the way, is Vancouver Open Water Swim
Oh yes, yes,
Association.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. Just for because that doesn't translate unless we say it.
You're right.
We have to get into the habit of doing that for people. Is like when we say sploop, that's the Stanley Park Loop. It's just that's what we call it.
Okay, 10. No, there's a 10 loop segment from
Yeah.
the roundabout.
Mm-hmm. I know there was people that used to do 10 before 10. That
Yeah.
that is a fairly I've heard of that. But I still think the most I've ever done is maybe 9, 8 or 9. I did 8 previous like this year at one point, and I did lots of 5s and 6s. It's what it takes to be the legend.
It's nice if you can get out there, and you got to get up so damn early because it gets so busy.
Yeah. I was a bike messenger for a while. I don't know if I mentioned that part, but I thrive in traffic. I don't get the same level of like fear and skittishness around like hip checking a bumper as some people might. I remember like I was on my way down to the crits this year at one point. I'm sure I saw you there, and I don't know, I was late or whatever. I felt like I needed to make up time. I was probably wanted to catch the group down at the bridge, so I was flying up Canby and Heather or whatever I was doing. And apparently, I didn't hear this, but somebody else overheard some guy who was following me, and he was like, "That guy's crazy." And I was like, he made me sound like irresponsible or dangerous or whatever. And it's like anything, you know, like when you come across somebody and they're like, slow down. It didn't feel crazy to me, right? I was going the speed and doing things that I was comfortable with, right? Like I'm comfortable staring down a car in a roundabout and then taking the right of way or whatever. You know, that's maybe you're not when you're trying to hold my wheel and I don't know you. Anyway. Yeah.
So I agree. The Stanley Park Loop is probably the route in Vancouver. Now,
Yeah, particularly if you've never been, you gotta come and you gotta do one of those or 10.
I feel like it's a good training loop, just because you know what it's going to be. Like you got a little bit of climbing, a little bit of descending.
Yeah, you probably hit a little bit of headwind.
There's bike handling in there because
yeah,
so many people.
Yeah, you gotta slalom around the horse shit.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. Yeah, there is a little bit of everything. And as Oliver, my nemesis in the local legend battle, likes to point out, it's one of the only routes where you can continuously pedal as well. You know, there's that three-way stop. There's that three-way stop that you have to do where you hook that left and head to the roundabout. But otherwise, it is continuous, and you can keep on the pedal going down the hill. Mm-hmm. And, you know, keep your heart rate, keep your cadence up. And, you know, I've gone out and done 5 laps without putting a foot down, door to door. Now there's track standing at stoplights involved there or whatever, but like that says a lot about the route when you can just ride continuously for 2.5 hours without having to put a foot down.
Yeah. The real life is definitely a selling feature of it.
Yeah. It's pretty cool.
So is that your favorite?
It is, for all the reasons I listed. It is close to my house. It is the go-to training loop. Like if I have a limited amount of time, or if I'm worried about maybe my phone ringing and getting called back or whatever, I'm never that far from home. You know, I'm maximum 20 minutes from my front door at any given time. And also riding one of the most picturesque and glorious cycling routes on the planet. And so it wouldn't be fair for me to choose any other route.
Well put. I used to be part of my big thing when I entered my first triathlon was the fact that I'd never ridden 90 kilometers straight before, because I hadn't ridden a bike for years. And my loop ended up being from my house in New Westminster to Stanley Park, do a spook there, go back down the seawall, do Spanish Banks Hill up and around UBC, and then back down to, I can't remember how the heck I did it, but it was horrible. I took Marine Drive down to,
Don't say Knight Street Bridge.
no, not to Ninth Street, which is like the only bridge I've crossed in Lower Mainland right now. But to
Don't.
Well, you gotta get them all. It's like Pokemon.
No, I don't. It's not Pokemon, dude.
It was back to the Canada Line Bridge, and then take River
Yeah.
Road into Queensboro and back. And
That's-
that was like my go-to long ride route on the weekends.
Yeah, that's not bad. I mean,
Mostly because I didn't know any other. I didn't know any.
yeah. You might be better off going over Arthur Lang and hitting River Road earlier, but you know that now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that,
Just because you avoid all that marine to get to Canby, virtually all the Richmond options to get over are better than the Vancouver ones going west east. Yeah.
And that was
Yeah.
that was my long ride every week, and I do my long ride and then jump off and do a long run because I thought like, oh, you just move your bricks as long as you possibly can, and eventually you'll be good at triathlon, right? Which apparently isn't the way you do it, but I didn't know then.
It sure isn't. What about segments? Strava segment. That's a different story. My answer, unfortunately, isn't going to be terribly exciting because of the route I've already given you. But do you have a favorite Strava segment and why?
So my favorite one is probably the one I hate the most. And it was
Okay.
when I used to ride downtown, my house was like right on Central Valley Greenway. But for some reason, like the map it gave me took me across like 10th Ave in between New West and Burnaby, and you go up past Robert Burnaby Park, and there's a big downhill there where then you hook onto Kensington, go down the west side of Burnaby Lake, and then get on the gravel there. And then carry on down Central Valley Greenway there. But like when you came back, you had to go all the way back up that stupid hill past Robert Burnaby. And there's a segment that starts from the lights at Kensington overpass to the top of that, I think it's 4th Ave. And I tried like all summer for like the whole year to make the leaderboard on that, because the first time I tried going up it, I had flat pedals on my bike, and I got halfway up and had to walk my bike up the rest of the way because I went the wrong way. And it was the worst experience on my bike I've ever had in my entire life, and I was so mad. And so I have a vengeance for that segment.
Huh.
It's
Interesting.
called Highway to Hill, and it sucks. It's like, I joke that it's like 1,000,000% grade all the way up, but it's probably like 12, 15 or something.
That's no BS though. That's pretty steep. That would suck. My first ever time up Cypress, I had to step off the bike. I remember my friend Brian. What's that? I think I probably was off the bike by kilometer 8 or so, or maybe closer to 10. But it was just like, yeah, I had to change the motion of my legs. I just needed to do something other than pedaling to give my legs a break, and walking was the most logical thing because it meant that I could at least control how much effort I was putting. I wouldn't fall over sideways. But I've since conquered that demon, you could say.
How long ago was that?
Probably going back 9 years.
Yeah,
9 years.
So was that like an embarrassing? You don't want to admit it.
No, I don't mind it. I don't mind admitting it. I really actually like that. And I hope someone's listening that has done that. And then I tell them, now I do it. I can't remember the last time I was, well, that's not entirely true. I've had some Triple Crowns that went a little poorly, and I've gone over 40 minutes, but I routinely come in at 37, 38 minutes now. And I do have a 33 in my rear view. So I've conquered that beast, you could say. But my favorite segment is one that's on the Stanley Park Loop. It's called Prospect Point Full Climb. So it starts at the bottom of I guess it starts like after there's parking, and you hook and you start to hit the actual elevation. It's right around the time that the elevation starts. I think the segment starts at that last crosswalk where you'd go into the Chickadee Trail. I always assume that's where it starts. Is there's the crosswalk up from the seawall to the Chickadee Trail, and then it starts the climb in earnest, and then you hook the left at the stump there, and the end of the segment is at the crosswalk that goes across well past the Prospect Point bathrooms at where the descent properly begins. Mm-hmm. And the challenge is that the steep stuff is over by the time you get to like the bridge overpass, right? You see the people taking pictures off the bridge, and you look down at Lionsgate Bridge or whatever, and things have flattened out, and there's, you know, the people coming off the bridge that sort of join back up at Prospect Point there, and you hook the left at the, you know, the cafe, the ice cream parlor or whatever there at Prospect Point, and then it's reasonably flat for a little while, and then it slowly picks up, and there's like an uphill drag sprint to the top of the quote-unquote full climb segment. And so you can't just strictly be a good climber that does the steep bits to the bathrooms. You have to stay on your power and drive the pace and fly up that false flat that is absolutely like just soul-sucking, and keep your speed and not let yourself off the hook until you crest over that hill, and then you can rest for a couple seconds.
Prospect is that's probably the segment I've seen the most people puke at.
Oh yeah. It's a beauty. I will go out there and do 3 laps where, you know, I'm holding just a steady pace, like maybe zone 2 pace for the whole lap, except I smashed the living daylights out of that segment and try to come in well under 4 minutes. And it's like a 4-minute absolute full gas interval with, you know, a 12-minute break in between, which is, you know, there's no science to that whatsoever, but like having a beginning and end and having it be like that perfect kind of in that 4-minute territory, it feels very, very beneficial, very kind of like efficient polarization of training. And I'm geeking out a little bit here, but like it is, that is, especially in the summertime, that's kind of how I train. It's like, I'm not doing a interval sessions like I'll do in the winter. I'm doing usually a race a week or more, and then doing things like the 602 ride or like forcing these like 4 to 5 minute full out efforts, trying to, you know, racing against a Strava segment essentially as an interval in order just to keep my top end speed.
Well, that's kind of what I was going to talk about next. Is what is it Stanley Park going to be like your go-to for training rides? Or do you have different routes depending on what you're...
When I'm solo, it depends, I guess, what I'm in the mood for. My favorite training ride is Seymour, is to go and do a Seymour. Mm-hmm. You know, my typical Seymour training pace is around, you know, we'll say it's between 45 and 50 minutes, which is again, like perfect sweet spot for, you know, threshold training. And there is a good 40-minute or so commute to get to the base, and, you know, roughly the same back again or more from the top of the mountain back home again. So it's, you know, in the neighborhood of 2.5 hours of base miles with a nice, good, hard chunk of threshold thrown into the middle there. You know, it's, as I say, it's 2.5 hours, but it's 2 hours 20 maybe, but a really efficient use of time for both aerobic activity, and, you know, sort of training. Not so much training from the bottom up, I guess, because I'm giving her. I'm not taking it easy on the climb by any means, right? Doing, you know, 46, 47 minute Seymours hurts, but it hurts real good, and you can't stop until you get to the top, you know, and I turn around right away and come back like, maybe eat a granola bar and put a jacket on and just turn around, come right back home again. But that is like the quintessential training ride for me, aside from like, a weekday where I've got my kids or whatever. It's, I'll knock off of work at 2:00 and go out and do 90 minutes where, it's maybe three laps of Stanley Park.
Do you think, going back to your Seymour, do you think those like having those long threshold intervals in the middle is better than just doing, would you say that's more beneficial to your training and increasing your upper level than like doing 5 rounds of Stanley Park and in zone 2 where you just hammer out the prospect segment?
I don't know what the science is on that. And I guess I'm about to, share a bit of my training philosophy, is that there is science on this stuff. Probably it's better for me to be doing the 4-minute efforts with zone 2 in between. The reason why I like the Seymour thing is because I'm out there for 2 hours 20, whether I like it or not. I could turn around and bail early, I guess, but I'm not going to, right? I'm going to go to the top of the mountain. I'm going to turn around and I'm going to come home. So I get my 2 hours and 20, as opposed to Stanley Park, where, like I said, I'm 20 minutes from bailing out and coming home. The furthest I get away is Prospect Point. So when I hit Second Beach again, I got to hook that left back into the park and keep going. And so Seymour is both, first of all, I guess like a sweet spot effort or a threshold effort, which is not ineffective, but it doesn't follow your typical sort of like polarized training science that people will tell you. But the magic there is that it keeps me out away from home longer. And that is what I mean by my training philosophy, is like,
so that was one of my
I got to hit 10 hours, 12 hours this week. What's that?
That was one of my first training philosophies for like any endurance event, right? Like I think somebody asked me about swimming and I said, the secret to like open water swimming is you like swim out as far as you think you can swim out. And then once you're out there, like you got to swim back or you die.
Yeah. I mean, that's awful for one thing. Like you've kind of made my case for me, but yeah, that's about the sum of it, right? Like you force yourself into that area of discomfort and, you have no choice but to come back from that distance. And therefore you put the work in, right? You didn't turn around early.
Like biking is very similar to that. Like a lot of my good rides is just like you set a goal to get somewhere and then like you got no choice. Like you're not going to Uber home.
Let's talk about that for a second, because as much as I do a lot of training and a lot of racing, I have to take my 10-gallon hat off to you, man. You put in some miles this summer and you did some shit. And so take me through like, Wyatt's top 3 ridiculously long days on a bike this summer, and then we'll talk about the other 10. Actually, start doing that, and I'm just going to fill my water glass while you start this story, because I can hear you in my...
This is another thing I got to blame on Christine, is like she come up with some good ideas and had it planned out. I just kind of had to show up on my bike and just not stop pedaling. So we did a couple Triple Crowns, we did a quintuple, and we did a Baker 300. Oh, and we did Whistler out and back. The Triple Crowns were really cool.
Yeah, but those are standard, and we can talk about that too. Like that's like that's almost like a go-to Vancouver route. A quintuple, a Baker, and a Whistler return same day are mind-boggling. Like, what's the distance on the Whistler out and back?
Like 240 or 260, I think.
240, 260. And what does it feel like coming home on the Sea to Sky after you rode to Whistler already that morning?
It actually wasn't, like the way to Whistler was way worse than the way back.
Really?
Yeah, I feel like we split it up pretty good. Like we basically did, what is it, four 60K rides. Because we do 60K, like we did 60 to Squamish, stopped, had a bite to eat. Did our next 60 to Whistler, stopped, had a bite to eat, turned around, come back, stopped in Squamish again, and then went home. So like we took some pretty big breaks throughout the day. And then like riding home, because you're on the sea sky of the sea side of the sea to sky, you get a better view of the ocean and Howe Sound, and it's just that much nicer.
Hmm. Wild.
And
Baker,
we had a good
300K day?
yeah. Baker was. I was the only. There's only. I was like the only non-Ironman on the whole ride.
Hmm.
Everybody else that signed up that day was like at least a one-time Ironman. Actually, I think everybody was multiple Ironman. Christine's a one-time Ironman. Everybody else had done multiples, and then I was there. Baker was again not as hard as I thought it was going to be, but like getting to the top, like when you get to the top, it's all over from there.
Yeah. I've only done Baker from to and from the border, Bob's Burgers there. And you guys did like
from New West. This is like
I've done the quintuple too. The quintuple I actually quite like. That one is fun, I will say. I've done it twice.
I feel like this summer was just, you look on Strava, now that I'm like following more cyclists and seeing what more cyclists choose to do on the weekends, I just felt like it was a big pissing contest on there to see who was going to do the thing that nobody else could do. So then, like, if you saw somebody do something, you go, I'm going to do that too. The quintuple was definitely on the top of that list. The quintuple was probably, it was the hardest one to do. It was a hot day. Like, we definitely knew it was going to be hard after the first climb.
Yeah.
And it was. We proved ourselves right. By the time I got to Cyprus, I got to first lookout, and there's a little old lady that we had passed on the highway getting to Cyprus, and she passed me at first lookout and beat me to the top and was going back down before I got to the power lines.
I remember that same day, the day you did the quintuple, I did about a 20-kilometer gravel loop with my kids in Squamish. And I was coming back from a long day of, like, we had set up at the beach. We had a full beach day, picnic, the whole nine. And we were on our way back in the evening. And I saw you guys coming home on the highway. And I thought, holy shit, what a day. Like, God, that would have been a long one.
It was I looked like Frosty the Snowman. I had so much salt coming off of me that, like, my jersey was all white.
We've been talking for 52 minutes. I think by way of beginning to wrap up, and because this is meant to be a podcast about our area in particular, what one thing would you say to somebody watching or listening to this show that might be thinking about coming to Vancouver for a cycling trip?
Go get some knobby tires on your road bike, come to a cyclocross event. It's the most accessible, like the gravel and cyclocross and stuff around here is probably like the most accessible thing that you can do on a bike anymore.
Yeah. Interestingly, there's not a heck of a lot of gravel in Vancouver itself.
It just seems like there's a gravel route from everywhere. Or a gravel route that you can get on. Like you can do.
There's a gravel route alternative for just about everything. Yeah, that's fair dues.
Fisherman's. There's Stanley Park gravel even.
Richmond and Pitt Meadows dikes. Like there's
the dikes and Pitt Meadows just go on forever and ever too. You could stay out there for weeks.
Yeah. Great tip. Solid. Not where I was expecting you to go with that. I still think about, I don't know, dentists that want to rent a Pinarello and do Cypress or something. But
come up here and buy like a specialized Athos, like an S-Works one, and go do a Triple Crown, and then give me your Athos when you go home.
Yeah. That's a nice one.
But I was going like this. So the cyclocross thing, I think is like a good. Like besides all the good things we've already said about it, it's so accessible for people. Like I looked at pictures of myself. So that's now getting into the cycling community and subculture. Like it seems like it can be an exclusive community or it can be an intimidating community because there are a bunch of rules that nobody even knows about, right? Like all the etiquette and what's that Velo thing that you told me about?
The Illuminati, yeah, the rules of cycling. There's like 125 rules of
Yeah,
cycling, and I try to follow them all.
Mm.
And yeah, but I like where you're going with this. Is that like cyclocross is like a gateway drug to bike racing, because you know, run what you brung, just go out there and give it a shot.
Yeah, and everybody's gonna cheer for you. Everybody's gonna have a good time.
Yeah, it's almost like the shittier you are, the more support you're gonna get.
Exactly.
And there's
Exactly.
not many places in the world where that's true.
But to tell you the truth, rodeo was like that too. Like
I
used
believe
to
that.
steer wrestle, and if you sat there in the middle, steer wrestling's a timed event. If you sat there in the middle and got muffed out by a steer for a minute before you got it tipped over, like you got the loudest applause in the whole building. You didn't make
I
any
have no.
money. But you
I
probably
understood
would've
half
figured
the
out
words you
that.
said, but I believe that same level of enthusiasm for somebody who's out there getting their ass kicked, for sure. Now, you know, cyclocross also has a heckling component, but I think the people who get heckled the worst tend to be the people who are doing the best, which is that makes it fun, I think.
It's for the humility. You gotta keep 'em humble.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't like a lot of cyclocross is like self-seeding in terms of the categories. There's age categories and things like that, but for the most part, you kind of like, if am I a novice, am I intermediate, am I an elite? That's sort of up to the racer. But of course, if you excel in a category, then you are going to get it from the fans, right? You can't, like, if you win a lesser category, you are by definition a sandbagger, and they're going to let you hear it, right? There was even a race, there was a local race called Donkey Cross, and in all of the lesser categories, a bag of sand came with the trophy. You know, you might get like, I won some socks and a bag of sand. Yeah, it was funny. All right, this has been an absolute hoot. Our technically, you could call it our microphone checker, but we have 56 minutes of episode, and I'm going to test out some tools, make some clips, and share them out and see where we net out, man.
All right, perfect. Well, yeah, that was good. We still got a lot of material here to cover in the next episode. So,
which is good. We need to do that. We need to keep mixing it up. We'll have something of a theme for each episode. And when we have guests on, we can ask a series of the same questions, like what we did today. What is your favorite route? What is your favorite Strava segment? And maybe a few others as well. How do you like to train? What's your goal race or event? And what would you say to people who were thinking about coming to Vancouver to do some riding? Thank you for a wonderful time, sir. I knew this would be a lot of fun once we got cooking.
yeah, this has been a good time.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
I would say I was going to go out and ride, but as you already know, I rode this morning. So, all right. Rubber side down. Take care.
All right, have a good one, buddy. Later.
Bye.